My boss told me a mother's place was at home, not leading the company's biggest project. He thought my mom duties made me weak, unfocused, and incapable. He didn't know that my late nights weren't just for soothing a crying baby, but for plotting a corporate takeover of my own. He thought he was pushing me out. He had no idea he was pushing me to become his worst nightmare. This is the story of how I used their prejudice as my greatest weapon. The alarm on my phone was a gentle chime, but the true alarm was a wail from the bassinet next to my bed. 5:30 a.m., the start of my day. Mia, my 8-month-old daughter, had decided it was time for the world to be awake. As I lifted her small, warm body, her cries softened into contented gurgles. In the semi-darkness, I navigated the familiar minefield of Lego bricks left on the floor by my 6-year-old son Leo. This was the first leg of the daily marathon. Downstairs, the routine was a frantic ballet of multitasking. One hand expertly mixed formula, while the other flipped pancakes for Leo. As he sat at the table chattering about a dream involving superhero dinosaurs, I packed his lunch, signed a permission slip, and tried to gulp down a lukewarm coffee. The final act was the most challenging, wrestling a squirming Leo into his school uniform while simultaneously trying to button my own crisp professional blazer. Just as I managed the last button, I saw a small purple smear of jam on the pristine white cuff of my shirt. I scrubbed at it furiously with a wet wipe, a perfect metaphor for my life, a constant attempt to keep the chaos of motherhood from staining the clean lines of my career. Staring at my reflection in the hallway mirror, I took a deep breath. My eyes had dark circles that no amount of concealer could truly hide, but they were determined. "You can do this, Olivia," I whispered to the tired woman staring back at me. "You did it before. It's just one more beautiful, screaming, wonderful human." The first day back at the office felt like stepping into a parallel universe. My security badge, inactive after 8 months, beeped an angry red, forcing me to suffer the small indignity of signing in as a visitor. My desk was covered in a thin film of dust, a testament to my absence. Colleagues offered awkward, stilted greetings. "How's the baby? Are you getting any sleep?" They were questions born of politeness, not genuine curiosity. Then a bright spot. Sarah, a sharp young analyst I had mentored before, my leave rushed over her face, beaming. "Olivia! Oh my God, it's so good to have you back. I swear I've been using your old market analysis templates for months. They're legendary." Her genuine enthusiasm was a life raft in a sea of awkwardness. She was an ally. A moment later, Mark strolled by. Mark was my direct competitor, ambitious single, and a man who wore his lack of personal attachments like a badge of honor. He gave me a cool, assessing glance. "Welcome back to the land of the living," he said with a smirk. "Bet you missed all this excitement." He was an adversary. The final piece of my re-entry was the meeting with my boss, Michael. He was a man in his 50s from a generation that believed a career demanded a monastic devotion. He waved me into his glass-walled office. He didn't ask about my career goals or my plans for the coming quarter. He asked about Mia. "So, how's the little one sleeping through the night yet?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, a picture of paternalistic concern. "You know they say that mommy brain is a real thing. All those hormones, haha." He laughed a dry, humorless laugh. My own smile felt tight, painted on. Then came the first move in his game of professional chess. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting to one of serious business. "I want you to ease back in. No pressure. There's a weekly social media sentiment report that needs compiling. It's a nice, simple task to get your feet wet again." My heart sank. The social media report was a task for a junior intern. Before my leave, I was leading multi-million-dollar acquisition strategies. It was a demotion disguised as a kindness, a gentle push towards the slow, quiet mommy track. The marginalization continued at lunch. I joined Mark and a few other colleagues hoping to reintegrate. The conversation was all about work, specifically the hushed rumors of something big on the horizon, codenamed Project Titan. I had led the last 2 M&A projects for the company. I knew this landscape better than anyone. When I tried to offer a strategic thought, Mark cut me off mid-sentence, a casual, brutal act of dismissal. "Whoa there, Olivia," he said with a chuckle, turning to the others. Let's not bog her down with this heavy stuff on her first week back. She's got enough on her plate. The table fell into an uncomfortable silence. He had publicly and effectively drawn a circle of relevance and placed me firmly outside of it. The final undeniable proof that I was no longer seen as a serious player came a month later. A critical strategy meeting was underway. Michael was at the head of the table outlining the competitive landscape. My phone, set to vibrate, buzzed against my leg. I glanced down. The caller ID read, Leo's School. A cold dread washed over me. It was the call every working parent fears. I knew I had to take it, but I also knew the cost. I saw the glances that would be exchanged, the sighs, the silent judgments. I quietly stood up my chair, making a barely audible scrape on the floor, and whispered an apology to Michael. He stopped mid-sentence. He didn't just stop, he made a performance of it. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and let out a long, theatrical sigh. Then he looked at me, his voice loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. It's all right, Olivia. We understand. Family responsibilities always come first. He didn't say it with sympathy. He said it like an accusation. Family responsibilities. 2 words that he had just used to brand me as unreliable, as distracted, as less than. Mark shot him a quick, knowing look. I could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes on my back as I walked out of that room, my cheeks burning with a shame I didn't deserve. The door clicked shut behind me, and in that moment, I wasn't Olivia, the senior strategist, anymore. I was just a mom leaving work. And in Michael's world, that was a cardinal sin. In the weeks that followed, the Cold War began. Michael's strategy was one of benevolent neglect. He was never overtly cruel, but he systematically starved me of meaningful work. My days were filled with make-work tasks, the professional equivalent of being sent to the corner. The most damning evidence of this came when I learned through Sarah about a secret pre-planning meeting for Project Titan. It was a small, high-level session with a few key team leads and, of course, Mark. My name was conspicuously absent from the invite list. I, the company's most experienced M&A strategist, had been benched. I thought you should know, Sarah whispered to me later, showing me a photo of the meeting schedule on her phone. It's not right. I looked at the photo at the names listed, and the familiar sting of being underestimated began to morph into something else. A cold, hard anger. Michael's next move was more insidious. He assigned me a task that seemed important on the surface, a deep dive analysis of Innovatech, the rumored target of Project Titan. I need your sharp eye on this, Olivia, he'd said. But he'd given me a data set that was 6 months out of date. It was a trap. A carefully laid snare designed for me to present a flawed analysis, thereby proving his narrative that my skills had atrophied, that my mommy brain had made me sloppy. I knew the data felt wrong. The market share numbers didn't align with recent industry news. I didn't confront him. That would have been his cue to feign ignorance and label me as paranoid. Instead, I went to Sarah. I need a favor, I said. I need the real-time data stream for Innovatech's sector, from the primary server. She nodded, a silent co-conspirator. That night, I worked on 2 separate presentations. One based on Michael's poisoned data, the other based on the truth. My life became a grueling exercise in compartmentalization. My nights were a blur. 9 p.m., rock Leo and Mia to sleep. 10 p.m., open the laptop. 11:30 p.m., Mia wakes up for a feeding. I'd sit in the dark, rocking her with one arm, scrolling through financial reports with the other. 1 a.m. Leo has a nightmare about a spider. I'd soothe him, check his forehead, and tuck him back in. 2 a.m. Back at the kitchen table, staring at spreadsheets, my eyes burning a cup of coffee long gone cold beside me. There were moments of profound doubt. I'd look at my sleeping children and a wave of guilt would wash over me. What are you doing? Is this worth it? Maybe he's right. Maybe you should just take the easy route. But then I would picture Michael's condescending smirk and Mark's smug ambition, and the fire in my belly would roar back to life. This was no longer about a promotion. It was about my dignity. My husband, Ben, saw the toll it was taking. He was my biggest supporter, but he was worried. "You're going to burn yourself out, Liv," he said one night, finding me asleep with my head on my keyboard. "You don't have to prove anything to those dinosaurs." "I do, Ben," I mumbled, my voice thick with exhaustion. "I have to prove it to myself." The day of the data analysis presentation arrived. I walked into the conference room. Michael and Mark were there, along with a few other department heads. I began my presentation calmly and methodically using the flawed data Michael had provided. I saw Mark lean back in his chair, a faint, pitying smile on his face. I was walking right into his ambush. I finished the final slide. "And so," I concluded, "based on this data, the recommendation would be a cautious approach, as Innovatech's market position appears to be weakening." Michael nodded slowly, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "Thank you, Olivia. A thorough, if somewhat concerning analysis." I held his gaze. "I agree," I said. "It is concerning, especially since that data is 6 months old." I clicked the remote. A new title slide appeared, Innovatech Analysis Real-Time Data. However, I continued, my voice now strong and clear, "if we analyze the data updated as of this morning, a very different picture emerges." For the next 10 minutes, I eviscerated my own previous analysis. I showed how Innovatech had in fact captured a key demographic in the last quarter, a move the old data completely missed. I showed how their new patent filings positioned them for explosive growth. The room was silent. Mark was no longer smiling. Michael's face was a stony mask, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. He knew he had been outplayed. He knew that I knew. Later that day, an email went out to the department. "Pleased to announce the official kickoff meeting for Project Titan. Mark Jennings will be leading the presentation of the initial acquisition proposal." He was still trying to sideline me. He had lost the battle, but he intended to win the war. I read the email, and for the first time in months, I smiled a real, genuine smile. It was a cold, sharp, predatory thing. He thought he was closing a door. I was about to blow the whole wall down. I stood up and walked over to Sarah's desk. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, "I need your help. I'm not just going to that meeting, I'm going to hijack it." My counter-offensive began that night. A direct assault was pointless. Mark's proposal would be data-driven, logical, and financially sound on the surface. To beat it, I needed something he couldn't possibly have: human intelligence from inside the target. I spent my nights not on financial reports, but on LinkedIn, becoming a digital stalker. I built a family tree of Innovatech's engineering department, looking for anyone who had left in the last year. I found him after 3 nights of searching: David Chen. He was Innovatech's former chief engineer, a legend in the industry who had gone quiet after leaving the company 6 months ago. I crafted an email to him, a careful piece of social engineering. I didn't mention my company or the acquisition. I presented myself as an independent market strategist, deeply impressed by a specific piece of technology he had patented. I asked for 15 minutes of his time to discuss his vision for the future of the industry. He agreed to a video call. For the first 20 minutes, he was guarded professional. I didn't push. I just asked smart questions, demonstrating that I had done my homework, that I understood his work on a granular level. I wasn't a corporate drone. I was a peer who spoke his language. Finally, he let his guard down. I asked the million-dollar question: a company with tech that brilliant, why are they struggling financially? He sighed, a sound heavy with frustration. He revealed the company's secret poison pill. It wasn't the technology. It was a new, numbers-obsessed CEO who had destroyed the creative, collaborative culture. The best engineers were leaving in droves, not for more money, but because the joy had been sucked out of their work. "They're a rocket ship with a fool at the helm," David said bitterly. "The core engine is still brilliant, but it's about to run out of fuel." He had just handed me the key. The company's true value wasn't its patents, it was its people, and they were on the verge of a mass exodus. Armed with this, I went back to Sarah. "I have a bomb," I told her, and I laid out the information. We became a clandestine 2-woman intelligence agency. While I focused on building my counter-proposal, Sarah's task was to dig into our own company's history. She compiled a dossier of our past M&A failures, showing a clear pattern. We were great at acquiring assets, but terrible at integrating talent, often leading to a post-acquisition brain drain. Her data would be the proof that our company was poised to make the exact same mistake with Innovatech. Our lives became a blur of secret operations. We'd have hushed conversations in empty conference rooms. We'd exchange encrypted files late at night. One evening, I was on a late-night video call with her Mia asleep in a carrier strapped to my chest. Just as Sarah was showing me a critical piece of data, Mia started to fuss. I remember rocking her gently with one hand, my finger on my lips, as Sarah silently pointed to the crucial numbers on her screen. During the day, I was a model of compliance. I completed Michael's trivial tasks with meticulous care. I offered to help Mark format his PowerPoint slides, an act of feigned subservience that inflated his already massive ego. "Sure you can handle it?" he'd asked, only half joking. "It's pretty complex." "I'll do my best," I'd said, with a meek smile. The closest we came to being discovered was one evening around 9 p.m. We were in my office, spreadsheets open on my screen, mapping out the financial model for my proposal. We heard footsteps. It was Michael returning for a forgotten briefcase. We frantically minimized the windows, my heart pounding against my ribs. He poked his head in. "Still here, Olivia, working hard, I see." "Just trying to get ahead on those sentiment reports," I said, my voice miraculously steady. He nodded, satisfied, and left. We looked at each other wide-eyed with adrenaline and fear. We were playing a dangerous game. The day of the meeting arrived. The main boardroom was an intimidating space of dark wood and cold leather, filled with the company's entire senior leadership team, including the CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Thompson. Mark began his presentation. It was exactly what I expected, polished, data-rich, and ruthless. His financial models were aggressive. His core strategy was a synergistic consolidation, a corporate euphemism for firing 40% of Innovatech's staff, gutting their R&D budget, and absorbing their patents. It was a plan that looked brilliant on a spreadsheet and would be catastrophic in reality. He finished to a round of impressed nods. Ms. Thompson looked around the table. "Thoughts, questions?" The room was silent. This was my moment. I let the silence hang for a beat, then two. Then I cleared my throat. My voice, when it came, was quiet but carried across the room. "I do," I said. "Not a question exactly. I have an alternative proposal." Every head swiveled in my direction. Michael looked like he had just swallowed a wasp. "Olivia," he began, his voice tight with fury. "This is not the time or the place." But Ms. Thompson held up a hand, silencing him. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and curious. "Go on, Olivia. You have 15 minutes. I walked to the front of the room. I didn't immediately put up my slides. I began by acknowledging Mark. Mark's proposal is an excellent piece of financial analysis based on the data available to us. I said a move that disarmed him and surprised everyone. His logic is sound if our goal is a short-term cost reduction. However, I said, and with a click, my first slide appeared on the screen. I believe the data we have is telling the wrong story. For the next 15 minutes, I didn't just present a plan. I told a story. I told the story of David Chen and the brilliant demoralized engineering team. I used Sarah's research to show how our company's own history was a warning against Mark's approach. I explained that Innovatech's value wasn't just in its patents, but in the brains of the people who were about to walk out the door. Firing them wasn't cutting fat. It was cutting out the heart of the company we were trying to buy. Then I laid out my vision. A talent-first acquisition. A plan that involved offering retention bonuses and significant stock options to key engineers. A strategy that proposed creating a semi-autonomous innovation lab led by a rehired David Chen, protecting their creative culture from our corporate bureaucracy. My plan was more expensive up front, but I showed with detailed long-term projections how it would lead to the development of 3 new product lines that would generate 10 times the initial investment. When I finished, the room was utterly still. Then Ms. Thompson began to speak her questions like sniper fire. What's the attrition risk? How do you guarantee Chen's loyalty? What's the timeline for ROI? I answered every single one calm, prepared, and in command of my facts. Finally, Ms. Thompson turned her gaze on Michael. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. "Michael, why am I only seeing this now?" Michael stammered, his face a blotchy red. "It was a last-minute, independent analysis." Mark sat frozen in his chair, a statue of impotent rage and public humiliation. "Ms. Thompson stood up, a clear signal the meeting was over. "Project Titan will proceed," she announced, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Based on Ms. Garcia's proposal, she will be leading the project effective immediately." The victory was immediate, but the aftermath was complex. The official handover meeting with Michael was a masterpiece of barely concealed hostility. "Congratulations, Olivia," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Don't mess it up." "I won't," I replied, meeting his gaze without blinking. I led Project Titan not just with efficiency, but with a new philosophy. I appointed Sarah as my deputy project manager, a promotion she had earned 10 times over. I implemented a core hours flexible work policy for my team, trusting them to get their work done without chaining them to a desk. I proved day after day that empathy wasn't the enemy of productivity. It was its fuel. The acquisition was a resounding success. We not only retained 95% of Innovatech's key engineering talent, but with David Chen at the helm, the new innovation lab launched a breakthrough product 18 months ahead of schedule. A year after that fateful meeting, I was promoted to Director of Corporate Strategy, the position Michael had been grooming Mark and himself eventually for. One evening, Michael walked past my new, larger office. He stopped at the door, hesitating. "Garcia," he said, his voice gruff. "I have to admit, I was wrong about you. I guess you're not like most mothers." I looked up from the quarterly report I was reviewing. I leaned back in my chair and gave him a small, knowing smile. It was not a smile of forgiveness. It was a smile of fact. "No, Michael," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You're wrong again. I am exactly like most mothers. We are masters of multitasking. We are wizards of logistics, and we can handle more pressure than you can possibly imagine. The only difference is now you finally see it." I turned back to my work, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, silhouetted in my doorway, a man finally forced to confront the ghosts of his own outdated prejudice.